Awesome. All right. Welcome back to another rendition of Dominate the Nation. My name is Maxine Doogan. I'm a currently working prostitute of 30 plus years and pretty much plan on working as a prostitute for another 30 plus more. And I'm joined with my special guest, Bella Robinson.
Hi, Maxine. Thanks for taking the time. I know when we both were kind of watching that YouTube commentary, and I don't know about you, but I was triggered as shit that so many things were wrong and they didn't talk about the right things, and no one reached out to any of us. So, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, so because it's been the anniversary of the Long Island serial killer's arrest, there's been a bunch of YouTubers who have done some great YouTubes on talking about, what's going on with that case. But sometimes some of the ways they talk about the case and they talk about the prostitute nation, it really gets my goat. And I have to respond.
Yeah.
So,
I remember I had just was moving to Rhode Island before Gilgo Beach, and the Craigslist killer was on the loose. So yeah, I was a little nervous about that, right? And we were decriminalized. Indoor prostitution was decriminalized. He killed the girl in Boston. He came to Rhode Island. He tried to rob an escort, and she dialed 911, and they cut him like that. And the
right.
state's response was to criminalize this. So when I started seeing all these women die up in Long Island, I've never been the type to like to be center of attention or be in public. But I said, someone's got to do something. This shit's not okay. There's going to be a next generation of sex workers. And I don't know why everyone seems to think this is okay. And they didn't even look in the water. Remember that famous case in Aruba when that girl went missing and it was like an internet? They were dredging the intercoastals. I don't even think they looked for a flashlight for Shannon out in the marsh for like 3 minutes, right? But think about it, if it was the senator's daughter, there would have been helicopters and dogs, and yeah, there would have been a response.
Well,
So
and the fact that in the Long Island serial killer case, they find the first four bodies and then they pause and they come back, several months later and they find a whole bunch more.
and it never made sense. They didn't get a cause of death for Shannon. They want to act like she was crazy and she was high. And even when her driver was cleared, they go up to the house. The man that owned the house said, "Oh yeah, I hired an escort." You know damn well they could have got a warrant, went in with all the trafficking stuff, right? But no, they don't even look in the marsh for her. And two other neighbors called the cops, and it took them 90 minutes to get there. And I heard it was 4 months later that a detective came to follow up on it. 4 months. And if she hadn't called the cops, they'd have never found any of them.
Right. Yep. Yeah, bless her heart. I mean, and her family's heart because they like some of the other families, reported, people missing and, need to be taken seriously. Um, but I think what really rubbed me the wrong way with some of the reporting about the Long Island serial killer is that when it comes to people in the sex trade, um, eh, we have to really talk about people like Rex, who's, they arrest him. They didn't want to arrest him, they said, but they saw that he continued to solicit people for prostitution, and they were worried. They were worried that he was going to kill somebody else and that they couldn't afford that, especially when they had him under surveillance. And so they pulled the trigger and went ahead and arrested him early. But the thing about Rex, to me is that there's tons of other people, tons of sex workers that Rex had contacted, that he had solicited, and that some have come forward. Like that blonde, the platinum blonde Nikki gal, she came forward and told her story, and good on her. But her story really talks about the fact that, she had a driver. She had somebody that went with her. She was not going to be somebody that Rex was going to be able to whisk away in his vehicle to his house, to do whatever he wanted to. And, she was not a good candidate. So, anyway, I just think that, several of, people in our community, it sounds like have reached out to the Suffolk County Sheriff Department to reported that, they've had contact with Rex. And I think the real thing that gets my goat, and I know it got yours too, because we talked about it, is when the Suffolk County Sheriff investigators said they identified 15 currently incarcerated women who may have had contact with Rex. And, so I wanted to talk about that problem of interrogating incarcerated women. Because,
Yeah.
as a formerly incarcerated person, it just puts you in a really bad situation to have to be questioned about somebody else's wrongdoing.
And also things that could implicate you in other crimes or violate your probation. And then we think about this. If you try to report something anonymously, or you don't want to give your real name, they go, oh, we can't take your report. Well, you can take it. You can't go arrest the guy, but you could put him under surveillance. You could still put two to two together. But they refuse to take reports, not just from sex workers, anyone in the public. It's like they don't want to investigate violent crimes because I don't know, maybe it's a little dangerous, and stalking hookers is low-hanging fruit and pretty low risk. Most of us are non-violent, don't have weapons, um, you know, and then but one thing I want to talk about,
Mm,
John Burke.
mm.
So John Burke was at the DA's office. He refused to let them have the warrant to ping the cell tower, probably because his phone was going to ping, right? He said he was worried about violating people's privacy, like the government has ever cared about that. I mean, y'all did this surveillance report recently. Y'all should go to sblip.com and read about it. So then in 2015, he's arrested and sent to prison for 4 years for interfering with the investigation. And the backstory they don't talk about. He was into snuff films. He'd asked other cops about snuff films. And some guy stole a bag of sex toys out of his car. And he went to the guy's house the next day with a couple detectives, and they beat the guy up. And they said, we'll give you a hot shot. We'll kill your whole family. And that guy got $1 million payoff for being abused. And they sent John to wait for 4 years. Now, that's in 2016 when he's sentenced. Now they're acting in 2023. They're acting like the FBI just started investigating, and wow, they solved the whole crime in just 3 months. Well, where the hell were they between 2016 and 2023?
Right.
Why are you going to send John to jail for interfering with the investigation and not investigate? So, something tells me, I'm not saying that any of the law enforcement was involved in the murders, but my gut's telling me a lot of them were hiring escorts, and they're paying escorts. It has been a way of life for many years. And it wasn't going to be a fun fact if that shit showed up pinging all over the place and not making them like they weren't going to get their pensions, or, we just can't have that. And also, they didn't want women to come forward because they might come forward and say something about one of these cops. Well, I don't know about the killer, but that guy Tony, we couldn't have that either. And this reminds me of John Gentile out in California in the 80s.
Who?
She what is her name? Gentile, Gentile. Donna. So she was,
Donna Chantilly
so
in
she was,
San Diego.
and they found her dead with her mouth full of gravel, which is what for snitch. So say one of these women in jail, or even in the free world, had something to testify about, like Valerie, or or the Border Patrol agent case. Who's going to protect them until they testify? There's going to be, even if it's someone in the public that's not law enforcement that's pissed off that, hey, you got one of us, because they're going to stick together. That's why they won't tell on each other, and the blue cold silence, right? And it's funny because they want everyone else to snitch on each other, but they don't want to snitch on themselves. I mean, they're all about getting some stitches, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Great point. I mean, that's just really a great point. Yeah, that Donna Gentili case out of San Diego, she was killed in 1985. She was found dead, and that case continues to be unsolved. And, she had talked about turning state's evidence on police officers that they were paying her for sex, and, she ends up dead. And, we need, the true crime community to go focus on that case, because now we got our internet sleuths, they can find out a lot of stuff and help, bring some peace and some justice, not only to Donna's family, because we know her aunt, who wrote the book about her. But, it's our community too, who needs to have justice about these killings. because, we're sick and tired of being the targets of these unscrupulous killers who target our community because they know we're criminalized. They know that we don't have access to equal protection under the law, that we don't have anybody to tell. And so, they just get to do whatever they want, you know.
And you know what it reminds me of? So let's talk about Celeste Gate and why she wasn't murdered. Because we
Mm.
have she had a community supporting her. So Celeste Gate came forward that cops have been exploiting her since she was 13. She had the VMO, they were telling her when they were staying, they were giving her cocaine and all this. So what did they do? They take her to Florida, victim services, and they put her in a rehab and they try to inject her with something. She says no, so she bites the guy and they out the world that she's got HIV. And then the prosecutor's like, well, we don't know if we'll be able to arrest these 7 cops because, we don't know how long this victim will be there on these major felony charges. Remember, we helped raise the money and
Yeah.
we got her a lawyer. She pled guilty to some misdemeanor. She was back in California in 3 days. Okay. And then after they paid her out $1 million, they dropped the case against the 7 cops. And that police department's been in receivership for over 20 years. There's a Netflix film about it. Okay. Her mama was a police dispatcher. And about a year later, her mom got naturalized. Okay. Because, but could you imagine you're a police dispatcher and your colleagues are doing this to your kid? She
Well,
just started when she was 13. And Camilla Harris, Vice President Harris, was the DA. She's like,
no,
oh, I'm not a
she wasn't. She was the state attorney general at the time, and that case was going on. But uh, I don't know that we want to talk about that particular case. I want to go back and talk about, because there's example after example. But, I just wanted to focus on what it would be like to be an incarcerated woman and have investigators come around to you in jail and try to talk to you because you've got prostitution convictions or you've got some connection to, sex work in some way that they want to find out, have you ever seen Rex? Did you ever see him? What was he like? Like they're trying to do some additional investigations on him to be able to get, what's going on with him. But what's really going on with him is that he's seeing all kinds of escorts all the time. He didn't kill everybody. I think that, part of the story that happened in the Amber Costello case, where she and her roommates set up a ruse where Rex ends up coming in to their house and she gets the money out of him, she's agreed to have sex with him. And then her roommates come in and act like her boyfriend or her husband and say, hey, what's going on? And, basically they run Rex off, but she gets to keep the money. And then, a day or two goes by and he continues to text her, hey, that wasn't cool. I really want to see, and I'm in my mind, he's running some game on her to say, I really want to see you. I'm going to pay you $1,500. Let me just come pick you up. You've met me now. I'm cool. And then, of course, she disappears, right?
and she got gullible. Because most of us know when they start saying all that money and stuff that there's red flags, even if you hadn't ripped them off.
Right.
Right? Too good to be true.
But
Right.
part of the problem here is that I think it's just really telling about Rex's behavior, that he'll go in and he'll suffer, getting ripped off. He doesn't really care. I mean, most all clients have been through that ruse that I know of, right?
Or he didn't just go murder somebody else. He probably would have called her for a year. you
Right.
know, or called her from another number. And this is another thing. All these escorts, if I had been the DA, I would have looked at all the online ads and I would have got warrants for all their cell phones. And I would have seen which common person was calling all of them.
But you
They
couldn't
didn't
do that. You
sell.
couldn't do that back in 2011. I don't know that the technology was there or the precedent for getting those cell phone records were there. And they didn't really have to do that, Bella. What they had to do is the DA, as he could now, as the old DA could have done back then, is said, hey, I'm going to invoke an emergency immunity on enforcing these prostitution laws so that people who might have information about suspicious clients can come forward.
We've done
And
that with finding the bodies, right?
well,
Immediately.
yeah, and they could have, and they still can invoke that emergency immunity and get people to come in without the threat of criminalization hanging over their head. Because my point is that as long as the criminalization of prostitution is hanging over people's heads, you're dealing with people who are not, have complete access to equal protection under the law, like the people who are doing the investigating.
They would rather die than be outed. This is the one misdemeanor you can never come back for. The world is never going to let you forget now that we have Google. Doesn't matter if they expunge your record or whatever, or you become a victim or whatever. The world is never going to forget. And you could rob a bank, you could do anything, and you can come back from it. Hey, I got clean, whatever. But they're never going to let you forget. It's going to affect your housing, your child custody, your future employment. It's basically, I got my first arrest 2 weeks after I was 18, and basically you're stuck. This is what you're going to do forever. The world's never going to let you forget. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
and
the arrest for prostitution causes so much social death that, it's not statute into, the criminalization laws. The criminalization laws for prostitution say if you're arrested, you go to jail, you get probation, you get a fine, or, they force people into community service to give their free labor, to these shame-based, sex-negative diversion programs. And, really the issue is that, if they have information on these murders, you need a clear path for people to come forward and give that information without being half citizens, or
especially cruel crime. It's not a crime against a person. It's a misdemeanor, right? We're not talking. So you rather let a predator go free, and maybe he's going to think your wife's a hoe because she's walking outside a bar. Because when it starts happening to ordinary women, everyone gets upset then, right?
right.
Uh, and we've seen that with the rape laws, right? That they could
Yeah.
bring up the fact that she was arrested, convicted of prostitution, as if that justifies it. Um, yeah, they're really sick like that. They don't want to. And let's also talk about the fact that they call us NHI. Those are the initials, no human involved, for sex workers, drug users, runaway youth, homeless women. And actually, the only two trafficking victims that were adults in Rhode Island that we found when we did the charging document reports were
Mhm.
two homeless women that were lured here. So of course, if someone's desperate, they're low hanging fruit again, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we can't work together and share information, because if someone knows where you are, and back in the day, the Yellow Pages escorts, they actually they didn't just take your half your money and post an ad like they do today. They had
Right.
security. You had to call them from a landline. Remember, we had beepers. Only hookers and doctors had beepers, right? You had to
Mhm.
call them from a landline. You had to call them when you left, or they were going to send someone there to protect you. And it's the internet did set us free as far as we can work for ourselves, but this idea that if we work together, it's all of a sudden a felony, and everybody we know is our adult children that live at home are criminalized, and if you have minor children, they're going to take them away, and you have a neighbor, a gay guy that gave you a ride, or all these, anyone in your network is now a criminal and part of the trafficking shit, right? And they work for us. Back in the day, we worked for them. But now they work for us. We want to hire a driver. We want to hire someone to screen our calls. They work for us.
Right.
Um, yeah. And when I got arrested when I was 18,
Mhm.
they told me if I pled guilty, they would withhold adjudication. I didn't know better. I'd never been in trouble. So I said, yeah. And to this day, you can go to the website and it says prostitution conviction withheld. So you might as well have just stamped a W on my forehead.
Right.
It's still public record. It's always, and that's even before we had the internet. You moved away, no one really knew, but now the internet's never going to let people forget. It's just not
Right.
going to happen.
And part of, and the additional burden of having those prostitution convictions and then having additional fines is it makes people in the prostitute nation have to take clients like Rex, people that are undesirable clients or people that give you the creeps, because now you have to pay the court some money to get out from
$750.
underneath, to the probation, have to pay for the ankle monitor, or you end up going back to jail.
That's
Somebody has to pick up the pieces, the financial pieces when mothers go to jail. Their kids, who's going to take care of those kids? They have to pick up the financial pieces for the child care for the mothers that are sentenced to jail. Society has to pick up the pieces too. And, it's an additional cost, a hidden cost to the criminalization of prostitution. So when we have police departments say, oh, yeah, we've got all these bodies and we don't have enough resources to, do these investigation properly. And, that's why we can't solve these, all these murders because we don't have enough resources.
we
Well,
need more.
the fact is that they do have enough resources. It's just they're spending the public's resources on arresting people for misdemeanor crimes. And so they do have enough resources. They don't need more cops,
Another thing too is, I know in all cases, like the ones that they can't tie to him right now, the family would like that. But in many cases, we see they only get a couple, they convict him, he goes away forever. We already know they have more evidence than they need. Now, I get that New York doesn't have the death penalty because in Florida, they just say, we're going to give you the death penalty unless you plead guilty and we're not having a trial. Okay. And even though they could have done that in Texas to the Border Patrol agent, they took the death penalty off the table. So he would get a trial.
Right.
And I'm not in favor of the death penalty until it comes to serial killers. Then I'm all for it, right? Because it's not that it was a mistake or you're wrongfully convicted. Like you killed more than three. We got you 3 times. There's no way we're wrong about this, right? Um, yeah, so it doesn't, like, they act like they still need more evidence. And I know that they want to put the pieces together and it's fun to make maps. And, the guy up in Alaska, they got him, what was his name? Hasten, because he had the map of where he had hunted them. He
Oh,
would
you're
take him
talking about the serial killer Robert Hansen that operated in the 70s and the 80s. Yes.
because when the girl got away in the handcuffs, his guys lied and said, "Oh no, we were at the pizza parlor together." And he's a nice guy that runs a bakery and is married, and they took his word for it. And then when they find it, he takes these girls on his plane to a little island and sets them free and goes and hunts them.
Right.
And found the map that had all the exes. And he said, "I'll plead guilty. I don't want to trial and don't bother my family."
And
So
I think Rex did the same thing because there's been a bunch of debates about how some of the women were found out in the open, and then some of the other women, like the first original Gilgo Four, who were wrapped and buried. And so they're just like, well, how could it be the same guy? Well, it can be the same guy. And I think,
upon him, and he had to be quick, right? He's a big guy. He probably lift them without much problem, right? And
well,
if you
and
were going to bury them and you see headlights, you dip. And he lives like right down the road. So he's got a
right.
reason to be there.
But, part of it is like, for me, it's like taking the missing reports seriously when we go missing, that the police don't take those reports seriously. And that's just, to me, that's like the starting point. When somebody goes missing, the police need to marshal all their resources and go figure out, what happened, in the Alaska current.
$40, right?
Well, in the current case in Alaska, against Brian Stephen Smith, who was just convicted for 229 years for killing 2 women and torturing one, her family had reported her missing. She's on the missing persons report, but then the police find another body and it has her ID with it. So they decide that that body belongs to her. They don't do any forensic testing. They don't
And the
do any
medical, no,
forensic
no for the medical
testing.
examiner. That's a no for the medical examiner, right?
Yeah. And then they find out later on, after they catch him and he confesses that he killed her, and that they took her off the missing persons, because he ends up confessing, oh, I did kill her, and here's the video of it. And then they go and they are able to identify her body and find her body. Well, they still have another body that's been misidentified.
Exactly. 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 And like we were talking about too, the truck drivers, the interstates, they've for decades have been littered with women, right? And I remember, in the 80s, we used to hitchhike. We didn't know better. Okay? Everyone was hitchhiking.
I was,
Nowadays, nowadays, no one's gonna even pick you up. Okay. I don't care what you look like. But remember that sometimes there was that one story about the box. The wife helped the guy and they put a box on her head and they kept her under the waterbed. And, it's just bizarre. It's just really bizarre. And I remember when I was a street girl, there was two times I wouldn't get in the car. It's not what he said. It's not what he looked like. I was high. I was Jones and I wanted money, but something in me told me, and you can't convince me they weren't serial killers. And I don't know how I knew it. I don't know how I knew it. But even having someone know where you are.
yeah.
So if you go missing, I'm gonna send the cops over there, and he better prove that you left there. He's gonna have to prove that you left there. You better have a camera because it's just gonna be like if you had a husband, that he's gonna be the main suspect here, right?
Yeah.
But they don't interrogate anyone. It actually criminalization has created a perfect playground for predators to prey on us. It's like and then meanwhile we get the cops and we get ICE and we got Homeland. It's like Hunger Games. Like they really want to harm us, and then they run around and lie and say we're all victims. They want to help us. No, you don't. You're trying to kill us because you ain't
Right.
got nothing for me. I don't remember when I was a street girl. That's why I hate people that do outreach. And when I was a street girl, if you didn't have some money, do not talk to me. I know Jesus loves me. Okay. And when we do outreach, we just go to a park and open up the car and anyone can wander over and they don't have to feel any different than, we're not, we don't even tell them who we are. They're like, why you do you need our name? No, just take what you need.
Well,
That's
that was the thing about one of the YouTube videos is that talked about, these former police officers who are doing these, documentaries on, missing and murdered women, chasing after street girls trying to find out information like, do you know who killed these women? Have you ever seen Rex? And it's just like a lot of times people just go to the police station to report to the cops that they're missing, that they have friends and family members that are missing,
well, they
missing.
saw something, but they don't want to give their real name. Right.
And then
Yeah.
they call because the person is working in the sex trade, they decide to rename her as a sex trafficking victim. And then they
Which they
decide to
arrest her because of.
rename you, the family member or the boyfriend or whoever is, a pimp or a sex trafficker. And so, to me, those are, renaming people is going to dissuade, people in our community or other members of the public from coming forward and telling what they know about, missing and murdered people. That
Another
the
thing,
sex
there's no
trafficking,
payphones anymore. There's no way to make an anonymous call. And I always try to tell people who try to do this immunity bill, they're like, oh, we don't want the client. If a client walks in a hotel room and the girl's 14 instead of me, don't you want him to dial 911? There ain't no payphone. He ain't gonna do it from his phone. He's not gonna ruin his life and his marriage and his career. And I'm sure he does want to help. And there's been times that we've seen something that wasn't right, right? But there's no payphones. And the fact that even if you do call from your own phone, they want your legal name. It's kind of like, some of the media, oh, we can't
but
talk.
Bella, look, in the Brian Smith case in Anchorage, where he went to trial and was convicted in February of killing these women, his girlfriend reports him to the police in 2018. She
Yep.
goes to the
I
police
thought it was a sex game and that she was lying.
and she tells the police, hey, he's showing me on his phone these videos of this woman who looks unconscious or she's dead. And, so the police, they never go and talk to him. They
They were
basically
scared he was going
use
to protect her,
her.
right? Could
Yeah,
be next.
they use her to try to get more information on him. So she ends up having to play some sort of, sweetie, come on, can't you tell me sort of game. And then, the police end up not being able to verify anything she's telling them. So they just close that
They
case.
don't have the
And
money
then
to know.
he goes on to kill Kathleen Joe Henry in 2019. So, even when people are coming forward and trying to tell the police, it's like talking to a wall to try to get them to investigate or be creative in their investigation. And when they don't, and then more people get killed.
And then we have the data of why sex workers don't report crimes. They're either arrested, threatened with arrest, or they don't think the cops will do anything to help them, right? So then I watched this documentary a while ago. It was about rape. And in these cases, the cops would tell the girl, we think you made it up. And if you don't say you're lying, we're going to prosecute. And they would say they were lying because, and then they would prosecute them and they'd go to jail for a year because they didn't want to investigate them. And there was like dozens of them all over the country. And this reporter lady was freaking out when she found out this. I remember in Alabama one time, a cop didn't investigate 2,500 cases of sexual abuse on children. 2,500, 2,500. I don't know what he was doing in the office all day, right? But yeah, and you're right. They don't want to do anything dangerous, right? Investigating serial killers or rapists might be a little dangerous, right? They want to do the low hanging fruit and abuse people. A lot of them that have already been abused, that don't make good choices or have shitty backgrounds. And they want to paint us all in the same stroke. We're always in fishnets, looking into cars. It's not like we're people that have families and friends or go to school or have jobs or community, and we're not people. And actually, let's talk about this. The first Hollywood movie was Birth of a Nation. And in the movie, there was a white woman sitting on a log. It was a silent movie. And it was a black Indian guy that jumped up and she went, okay. And that movie caused mass lynchings across the country. And ever since then, Hollywood has portrayed sex workers like shit. They're responsible for a lot of it. Okay. You watch the crime shows and, oh, she's a dead hooker. And then there's video games. What is it? Where you get extra points for killing the hooker. And a lot of times they have students say, how can I help? Well, next time someone's making a dead hooker joke, call them out on it. Just like you'd call them out if they made a slur against LGBT people or racism or anything else. So it really is how we've been paying. And the government's, I can compare this to how they're denying there's a genocide in Gaza with the lie about trafficking. And in 2015 alone, Congress gave out $676 million to any nonprofit that would do a few things. Great awareness about trafficking. That's really promoting stigma and violence. Host public trainings on how to spot trafficking, encourage people to call the police on them. Don't support duty crime or talk to people like us. And after 20 years, people believe it. It started QAnon back in the Pizzagate, where the guy showed up at the pizza parlor expecting Hillary to be down in the basement with some children, and there was no basement, right? Crazy conspiracy theories. And it goes on and on.
But there's a lot of not conspiracy theories. I remember, because I've been around a long time, I remember the story of Marie Malvar, who watched, her boyfriend watched her get into a truck, in 1983 on the notorious Seattle, Washington track, and she was never seen again. And he goes to her father and tells her what happened, that the two of them, the father and the boyfriend, search the surrounding neighborhoods and they find the truck that she got into. It's parked in front of the house that belongs to a guy named Gary Ridgway. They report it to the police. That Maria was working the strip. They tell the police everything. She's working the strip. The boyfriend knew. The boyfriend was her security, that the father knew everything. And they took the police to the house where the truck was parked in front of. And the police talked to the truck owner and nothing more. And 4 years later, the police take a saliva swab from that truck owner, which led to the arrest of the Green River Killer 18 years later. 18 years later. 18 years later. How many more women died because the police, didn't catch that guy right then? All they had to do wasn't, spend their resources and watch him and sit on him. They could have caught him in the act. They could have caught him in the act of picking up women and trying to kill us. And instead, what they do, they spend all their resources doing prostitution sting operations. The
Right.
prostitution sting operations on the track have
$1,000 and you can't arrest anyone.
but the prostitution strings on the track have the effect of forcing the workforce into areas that are not well lit, that there's not a lot of people around, and it makes those women, it made those women even easier prey for the Green River Killer. So, the enforcement of the prostitution laws have to stop. The prostitution laws have to be repealed because we need to redirect the cops' resources into doing actual investigative work when we're missing and when we're murdered.
Violent crimes. Absolutely, absolutely. I remember even in prison, they targeted women with drug and prostitution charges. I did 5 years at Lowell. In December 2020, DOJ wrote a report that they violated her rights and let the rapes continue for decades. And they documented the retaliation while they were there. And guess what? Nothing's happened. But somehow California, and a federal prison it happened to, the girl testified, they locked her down. The judge showed up at the prison. They shut the prison down. Now, sadly, they can send them 3,000 miles away and, in retaliation. But we know this is going on in every jail and prison in the country,
Right.
Remember the cop that raped all the black women? He even raped the 17-year-old on her mama's porch, but then he raped the 54-year-old woman that never had a traffic ticket. And this was weird. He got like 250 some odd years.
What are you talking about?
His name was Dan something or another. I begin with a K, but he had raped all these women. He would tell them they have a warrant, things like this. But finally he got one that didn't have anything. So he got sentenced to like 255 years. And it was really weird that anywhere, if you know someone's DOC number, whether in federal or state, you could find out a writing address. And they couldn't find out where he was. And they said it was for his protection. Well, cops go to jail all the time. I think they let the guy go. And said, I don't know. That was just, I've never heard of such a thing where no one could verify what prison he was in. It was really weird. I have to look him up. Stan something or another. But it was a big case because he had done this to so many, marginalized women, people on drugs, people on the street, the 17-year-old on her mama's porch. And then he did to a 54-year-old black woman that never even had a traffic ticket. And that's another thing. They keep saying they have to collaborate. Why would women come forward and lie and say they had dinner with Rex if they didn't? Right? If it's any other witness, they're not trying to collaborate with the witness. As you said, he was in a blue truck, and they tell everyone he was in a blue truck, right? So this idea that we're not truthful and that we're a bunch of liars, I think we have a lot more character and honesty than most people. And we know not all sex workers are nice people. Not all of any population are nice people. But you can't paint us in the same block. The violence against us has to stop. We have a right to safety. And it's crazy that all over their cars it has protect and serve. And there was a case in New York where someone got stabbed on a subway or a train or something, and the police were right there and they didn't intervene, and the courts ruled they are not obligated to protect you. You're like, what the fuck? Because, the police were created to help union, factories and business owners against, the unions and the people. That's what they were for. They were thugs. They weren't, I just got way off track with that one, but yeah, they're not trying to get the public's trust. It's this idea that if you say something about one cop, everyone gets mad at you as if there can't be a dirty cop. Well, maybe if you acknowledged it and helped us get rid of the bad apples, you could gain some trust back with the community. And I remember in the 70s and 80s, there was a beat cop that walked around. All the businesses knew him. People didn't snitch. But if there was a guy like beating up old ladies and smashing them in the head, taking purse, people told him who it was, right? When they did something bad. They didn't snitch on the little shit, but they worry about that. Think about the Patriots Act. Oh, we're going to use it for terrorism. The next thing you know, they're using it to arrest you for $5 worth of marijuana. Okay. The government is a big fat liar. And it's just like, I think every government institute is corrupt, and, racist and discriminatory. And, we talked to, the U.S. State Attorney for, District 1 last year. They were rolling out, they had a big grant to teach LGBT people the difference between hate crimes and discrimination. And me and Tara got a call with them. It took us a couple months. And we said, we're not covered by hate crime legislation. We don't have any discrimination legislation. Do you know that when we surveyed 1,500 people, only 36% were heterosexual? Did you know 80% of trans women have been involved in sex? So this is what I tell educators. These are your people. You're not even advocating for them. They won't write a law. What about the next generation of youth that comes from even more toxic families since Trump made hate? How are we gonna be ready to support them? Right? Because it's gonna be about mutual aid. The government's not gonna come help us. They wouldn't house the homeless during a pandemic. The government's never coming to help any of us. Okay. This idea that I know I don't want to be exploited and work for minimum wage. Even on my worst day, it beats working at Walmart. uh, and that we're just supposed to go be poor and suck it up. No, thank you. And you see how they're treating the homeless people now. No fault of their own. They're becoming homeless because of rent, the economy. And the government is like a bad parent who doesn't want to take responsibility. And they created the whole situation, just like the cops have created this whole situation by criminalizing us. And if they cared, they'd be advocating. Yes, this is the law, but what they do up in New York, we're not going to arrest the women. But they still arrested them in Queens. They just didn't arrest them in Manhattan.
Well,
Uh,
but part of the issue is that, the police are saying, well, we don't have enough resources. And then they end up, cities end up giving them, tons of money, like the LA just gave the police just like $1 billion. And so then we see all of these, they turn around and they donate to their, police, peace officers, benevolent associations. And those associations in turn donate to all these candidates, right? These candidates and these legislators to their campaigns. And then those same elected officials are supposed to be the ones who are doing the oversight on the police when there's wrongdoing, and they don't. And so the problem is that when you're crying about resources, but you've got so much money that you can afford to give to these candidates who are supposed to be doing the oversight of this public safety that you're involved in, that you're being employed to do, it's a conflict of interest.
and
It's a
you get to pick
it's a
investigate.
conflict of interest for elected officials to, be expected that they've taken all this money, this campaign donation money from these police officers that they got from the public anyway, right? Because we pay them from the public coffers. And
At the
then
same
those same campaign people, those legislators, are supposed to advocate for, a better police force. And the police turn around and lobby against those kinds of good practices. For example, in
time,
Alaska, let me give this example. So in Alaska, we get a bill introduced that says if police have sex with you in the course of a prostitution sting operation, and they go so far as to have sexual contact with you or sexual penetration, that's going to be a 3rd and 4th degree sexual assault. And the police force came out, the Anchorage Police Department came out and said, no, 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 you can't pass that law because in order to enforce the prostitution law, we have to have sexual contact with people as a means to arrest them. And so that is a public statement that the police made. And one police officer in specific is named Sean Case, an Anchorage police officer. He was just appointed as the Anchorage police chief in Anchorage for the new mayor. So here you have a police chief who has advocated against the immunity legislation so that we could come forward and report when we're victims or witnesses to crime without being charged with prostitution. And he's advocated against having police officers be charged with felony sexual assault when they're having sex with us in these prostitution sting operations as a matter under the guise of rescuing us as sex trafficking.
Right.
So people are unaware that police are allowed and it's legal for them to have sexual contact with us in the course of these prostitution sting operations under the guise of saving us. And that plays against the public's trust and our community's trust of police officers when you're going and you're investigating missing and murdered women. So that is another reason why we need the complete repeal of the prostitution law.
sex with minors, and the church people that want to rescue us are trying to screw us and have sex with us. But I want to go back to the money thing. So here in Rhode Island this year, we had several Leah board bills. We had a good one to repeal it. We had a couple shady ones, and then the Senate
You had
president.
what?
We had a couple Leah board here. One was to totally repeal it, and there was some feel good bills. And the Senate president had one. Wasn't going to do anything, but it said it was, and that was fast tracked. Everyone knew it was going to pass. Me and Harrison Turtle were the only ones that showed up to oppose it. We knew it was going to pass. We couldn't stop it. And we had a fundraiser 2 hours later. 2 hours later, there was only 3 bills on the docket. I've been in hearings where there's 36 bills.
Right.
Okay. Okay. But it was set up. Everyone knew what was going to happen. And it's the same thing as the Shield bill. So you can't sue doctors, and making name changes is easier. And while I'm glad those things passed, they were fast tracked. We have a bill that says if you're a cop, a probation officer, or CO, and you engage in someone with sex that's in your custody or under your supervision, you're going to prison for 3 years. And they said, why isn't it going to be 7 years like 3? I said, well, I'd like to be an abolitionist and not lock people up, but convicting them of the felony is the only way you can fire them because of legal. We have 10 senators and 10 reps. This is the 6th year. No one's opposed it, and they won't even suggest to vote it out of committee. So it's really about money with these committees, and we saw this with our other legislation of the bad immunity bill and who controls the study commission, and it's all about money. So you're right. That's what they do, and we know the police union is the strongest union in the world, is it not? And while we love unions, we don't like that one.
Well, they won't accept that union inside the San Francisco Labor Council because there's a major conflict of interest.
And all they got to do is not renew the contract. All they got to do is not renew the contract and say, no, we'll hire different people, go away, right? That's all they got to do. And think about that prison in California when they shut it down. If I had been the governor,
Federal prison.
we would have sent the National Guard in there until we got new officers to train them. Everyone's going home, and we're starting from scratch. And there's no cameras in prison on purpose. On purpose. And you know what happens to you when you report a rape in prison? You go to a cell called protective custody. And it's the exact same cell they use for solitary confinement, where you don't get commissary, you don't get phones, and you don't get visits, and you only get a shower every 3 days. So you were punished, and then all the other guards are mad at you. When I was at Lowell, there was a woman that had wrote a letter to the AG, and the letter was in the mail. She only had a couple years left for grand theft or something, and she was being harassed and sought by an officer. She was on suicide watch. You're supposed to have a roll of toilet paper and a paper blanket. And they're supposed to physically look in this window every 15 minutes. And they claim she hung herself with her belt. She ain't supposed to have a belt. And no one goes to jail. They just fire a couple people. They've been murdering us on the outside by creating violence. They've been murdering us on the inside, just like they, murdering Black and brown people in the streets. And I kind of grew up so naive that, bad people, you get what you deserve if you go to jail. Even serial killers deserve to be treated like human beings when they're in jail. We don't abuse people. The only reason we're locking them up is to protect the rest of society.
Right. So let's talk about Rex. Let's wrap up here and talk about Rex. I think he's going to take a plea deal. I think he's got more charges coming. I think he's going to be forced to take a plea deal. He wrote that letter to that other serial killer in Oregon, and that serial killer told him, yeah, you should take the plea deal, because then you're going to get to ask for some things, some conditions in jail. And that's really all the leverage you have when you don't have the death penalty, I don't think it's going to go to trial. The trial is slated for next summer, 2025. But I just see him pleading before them.
Tough guy. You can see that. See how meek he is? He's not a tough guy. He's not that smart. He's not street smart like jail smart, right? He's not a tough guy. Okay. He might be a big guy, but he's not, he's probably going to cower. He's probably going to get raped away in prison. Okay. He's not a tough guy. He's not smart. We would have had all the hotel keys, and I said, now those are trophies. Those were his trophies. The people were like, I was like, how do you not know that? It's better to have a hotel key than an earring, right? And I'm sure even the maids at these hotels probably would recognize him, or the front desk. Did they ever run around to the hotels with this picture? They do it on what's the show, the sex crime special unit sex crimes thing. They do it on that show, but the real cops can't do it. You
Right.
know, it just, but what gets me the most about the podcast is they're going to reframe the narrative like the government always does. They're not going to remind people that the FBI dropped the investigation when they locked John Brooks up. And even when he was arrested last year, they said he was arrested for solicitation. People think he propositioned someone for money. He walked into a park and said to a man, I just like to suck dick. That's what he said. So I have a feeling he hates women. That's why he likes snuff films, right?
Who cares
Um,
about John Burke? My concern is they're going to fuck up and they're going to let Rex walk. I think he would plead out, but I'm really concerned, especially after watching the Karen Reed case,
oh my
that,
God.
where they had to, all these police officers got up there and admitted, oh yeah, I called her this name and that name, and I was in a group text with my supervisor and called her this and that. And they put that guy on the stand. And even in the Alex Baldwin case, there's prosecutorial misconduct. What
Taking of
if,
a
what if Rex's defense attorney, what if his defense attorney is like, these are all prostitutes. They're not credible people. I mean, look how they treated Valerie in the Brian Smith case.
girl in,
You know,
the border.
yeah, yeah, they
She's
tried
a
to,
she's a prostitute, right?
yeah, they tried to discredit her. But what if, because of Burke, because of the former Suffolk County, police chief, because of the former Suffolk County district attorney's actions or inactions in the investigation of these murders, there is some sort of loophole that ends up, that Rex's defense attorney uses and is
And what
able is
murder? They did exactly that.
yeah, that he's able to, they have to let him out of jail. What if
They
some
just let a
fucked up
woman
shit
go.
like that happens, Bella?
The Mississippi Supreme Court let a lady go who was the longest woman locked up, um, wrongfully convicted person in history. And they knew it years ago. And even though they've already said it, they still have her sitting in the county jail. Like, aren't they supposed to open the door immediately when the judge says that? They don't want to let us go. They don't want to admit we're wrong. Even if they know they don't have the right killer, they don't care about getting the right killer. They care about not being wrong. It's a power struggle. And it's all about qualified immunity. We need to get rid of qualified immunity. That's
Well,
the analy.
qualified immunity and, keep cops from being able to donate to candidates, legislators who are supposed to be the ones, you
The
know,
ethics with criminals or victims or witnesses of crimes, right? And I remember up in Alaska, it was like, well, what do you mean I can't date a domestic violence victim if I bump into one? Well, out of the whole pool of people, you want to, and I know there's a thing they do. They take hubby to jail, and they tell you they're going to help you. And you got 2 kids, and then they come back a couple hours later, they got a gun. And you might be in shock, and I'm pretty sure you don't look horny, you got a black eye, right? And they're scared to say no. They're probably in shock. What makes you think someone that just was beat up, or they use their own computer to look up girls and stuff that they think you're hot, now they start stalking you and they know where you live, and you know, they're predators. And they know we won't hire them if they have too much of an IQ, right? They don't want them to be smart. They want them to just be, like soldiers, where you do what we say and don't question it, right? You can't tell on each other. Um, but yeah, it's bad. It's bad. And I want to remind everyone that on December 17th, we hold a nationwide vigil, because that was the day that the Green River Killer was killed. And we made a list a couple of
he
years ago that
wasn't
went.
killed. He was arrested. He was finally arrested in
I
2000.
meant sentence, not killed. uh, but we made a list going back to 1836. And usually when I do the December 17th list during the year, there's a couple here and there. But the fact that I had to do so many at the same time was not good for my mental health. It was just really horrible. We had to fact check things. And sadly, how we had to find these names? We literally have to Google dead prostitute, Alaska, dead hooker, right? Because the media will not let you forget that, oh, she was murdered and dismembered and left in a park. And by the way, 3 years ago, she was arrested for prostitute. But they don't say that when it happens to the nurse, right? Or anybody else. And I want to talk one more thing about affirmative defense. We have this in Rhode Island. So affirmative consent says if you were a victim, you were going to be arrested. The media is going to put you on the news. And when you go to court and say you're a victim, they can't prosecute you. Well, it's a little late. They've already ruined your life that quickly, right? They've traumatized you during arrest. And we all know the first time you're ever arrested is very traumatizing, right? After, I'm not saying it's okay afterwards, but it's really traumatizing. Then the world's never going to, that you were accused of being a prostitute. And it reminds me of a case that happened down in Florida about 15 years ago. The jury found this woman guilty of prostitution and the judge threw out the conviction. He said, you didn't prove that prostitution occurred. They didn't have a phone recording of when he called to book the call. He said she could have went to that hotel for many reasons. You did not approve. She got there and got nude, and he didn't want to get nude. She didn't say anything about money. She didn't say anything about sex. And just because I've been arrested 100 times for prostitution doesn't mean I was doing it that day, right? But he actually threw the conviction out. And it goes to show that any woman that is accused of it cannot get a fair trial with a jury of her peers because the world has been taught to be biased and hate us. It's ingrained from the time you walk. If you start asking college students how old they were when they knew what a prostitute was, they'll tell you 5. TV shows, cop shows, video games. And the black kid said the most interesting thing. We're driving down the road late at night and there's a woman on the corner. I said, Mama, how come you're not going to offer her a ride? Because poor women do that in poor neighborhoods, right? And his mother said, because she's a bad woman. So he doesn't even know what sex is, but he's already been taught she's a bad woman. And society's been taught that bad women get what they deserve. What do we say, Maxine? There are no bad women, there are bad laws.
That's right. There are no bad women, only bad laws. Well, thanks for joining us today. We'll put a bunch of links to our organizations in the show notes, and we hope that you support us. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much, Bella.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Thanks, Maxine.
Bye.